It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. The presidential campaign to replace President Rafael Correa of Ecuador is in full swing. The election is scheduled to take place in just 2 weeks. On Sunday, 8 presidential candidates faced off in the only debate that included the front-runner, Lenin Moreno, of the current governing party. President Correa is not running for re-election as term limits prevent him from doing so. The debate took place just 2 days after an important accusation was made against Moreno's running mate, the current vice president, Jorge Glass. The accusation came from a former oil minister under Correa, who is currently on the run in the U.S. and who claims that Glass was involved in a corruption case that has to do with the Brazilian construction company Odebrecht. Joining us now from Quito, Ecuador, to discuss this is Gregory Wilpert. Greg is a producer with the Real News Network, who is currently based in Quito. Thanks for joining us, Greg.
My pleasure.
So, Greg, before we get into the latest corruption developments, let's take a look at the campaign itself and who the candidates are that is running, and just give me a rundown on their profiles.
Well, there are actually 8 candidates, but only 4 of them are really in contention for the presidency. The first one, the front runner, is Lenin Moreno, who's got something like, in the most recent polls, around between 30 and 35% of support from the general population. And he's representing President Correa's party called Country Alliance, or Alianza País. He's a former vice president, and he was also a commissioner for the United Nations in Geneva to work on disability issues. And actually, he's wheelchair bound himself because of a mugging that he suffered, and so he's been one of the main spokespersons actually in the world practically for disabled people's rights. And many people here see him as a welcome relief to Correa, who's been always very kind of bombastic and in many ways similar to Chavez in his outspokenness and so on. And people feel like, you know, there's a need to have somebody who's calmer. And Lenin Moreno certainly fits that bill. The other candidate, the main opposition candidate, really seems to be Guillermo Lasso, who's a businessman and banker, and he ran actually against Correa back in 2013 and lost quite significantly. He's also, his platform is essentially a neoliberal, typical straight down the line neoliberal platform. If he were to be elected, he would probably go along the ways of Mauricio Macri in Argentina or Michel Temer in Brazil. And right now he's running around 22% of the vote, which isn't very much, but if it comes to a second round, then he would have a very good chance of beating Moreno, unfortunately. For Moreno, certainly. And so that's the main contest. But then there's 2 other candidates who actually could also make the second round, because right now they're running very close to Guillermo Lasso. And the other one is Cynthia Viteri, who represents the Social Christian Party. She's got something like, I think, around 18 or 15% of the vote so far of support. But and she's another conservative candidate, also neoliberal. And then the fourth one, who's really actually a distant fourth, so it doesn't really stand that much of a chance, but is worth paying attention to anyway, because he kind of represents scattered leftist parties, and he's also got the support of the indigenous, or a sector of the indigenous movement, Pachakutik. His name is Paco Moncayo. He's a former general, and he represents the party United Left. Although actually the United Left itself as a party is very similar actually in terms of its politics to Correa. So the difference between him, I mean Paco Moncayo, and the frontrunner Lenin Moreno is very difficult to tell, I think, in terms of their politics.
Right, and then so the corruption scandal that I mentioned earlier in the introduction has taken center stage here in this campaign. How is it going to affect this election?
Yes, it broke. I mean, there's been corruption rumors and investigations and so on going on actually continuously for the past 6 months, and especially it got a lot of gained a lot of steam when Odebrecht signed a plea bargain agreement with the U.S. Justice Department where they agreed to pay something like $3.5 billion in damages and penalties for the corruption that they engaged in bribing officials throughout Latin America. And one of the countries that was affected was Ecuador. And so this is when this was about a month ago, and the scandal really broke and gained a lot of steam. And the former oil minister for Correa ended up fleeing the country. And he was the main person, the main target who had received money apparently from Odebrecht. But now he came out just last Friday, just 2 days before the debate, the presidential debate, accusing the vice presidential candidate of the governing party, Jorge Glass, who's also the current vice president, and who at that time was in charge of the oil company and actually in charge of deals with Odebrecht. He's accusing him of being having known about the corruption scandals. He didn't accuse him of having received money. That's interesting. But he did accuse him of having known about the scandal. But there's a lot of questions about the veracity of somebody who's on the run, and he seems to be, and it's kind of dubious, the whole thing, because he contradicts himself he made a video and made it public, and so it seems a little bit strange, especially so shortly before the presidential election, how it came out. But all of the candidates, of course, during the debate picked this up and called this the most corrupt government in Ecuadorian history, and they basically lambasted Lenin Moreno, who's like I said, he's a very soft-spoken person, so it was a little bit strange in a way to see this, the way they were attacking him, considering that this person he seems like the most straight, most honest politician you could imagine, especially considering all the work he's done for disabled people and so on. And he's written several books about the importance of humor in curing people and things like that. So it was a little bit.
And how is Vice President Jorge Glass responding to these allegations?
Well, he's certainly denying it all. He himself, he's viewed a little bit with suspicion especially among the left here, the left that supports. I should mention that Correa is receiving the support of the Socialist Party and also of the Communist Party. They're in coalition with the governing party, Alianza País. And so he's viewed with a lot of suspicion because he's seen as being very centrist, very and so, but Glass has, he hasn't come out that strongly about this. Correa has come out in his defense very, very strongly, of course. And Correa remains the most popular politician here in Ecuador.
Greg, join me for the second segment of this interview where we'll continue the conversation about how this corruption scandal is affecting the ongoing campaign.
Okay.
Stay tuned for our next segment.